May 2025, United Kingdom. Peter Sullivan, 68 years old, has just been acquitted after spending 38 years behind bars. Back in 1986, he was convicted of murder with no solid evidence, no lawyer, and just a vague confession. Almost 4 decades later, a DNA sample was re-examined, and the result shook the entire nation. It wasn't his. The case was turned upside down. A life was stolen. An innocent man lost nearly a lifetime behind bars, all because of one mistake and a single drop of DNA. Before we dive into this shocking case, hit that like button if you believe in justice. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life crime stories. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Diane Sindel was just 21 years old, a kind, soft-spoken young woman from Birkenhead, Merseyside. She worked part-time as a florist and was also picking up extra shifts at the Wellington pub in Bebington. Why? She had one simple dream: to save up for her upcoming wedding to her fiancé, David Beatty. On the night of August 2nd, 1986, Diane finished a late shift and headed home, just like usual. But along the way, her blue van ran out of fuel, left with no other choice. She abandoned the vehicle and began walking into the night, hoping to find a nearby gas station or a bus stop. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Round noon the next day, a woman out walking her dog made a horrifying discovery. Diane's body was found in a narrow alley. She had been beaten beyond recognition, partially undressed, and showed clear signs of sexual assault. Police called it one of the worst cases they'd ever investigated. An autopsy revealed Diane had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to the head. A savage, relentless attack with no chance to fight back. In the early days of the investigation, police zeroed in on one man, Peter Sullivan. He was 30 years old at the time, and he happened to know Diane Sindel. They'd spoken once at the bar where she worked. There were no witnesses, no physical evidence, but Peter was still labeled a suspect and taken in for hours of questioning. Here's where things get deeply troubling. Peter wasn't given a lawyer, no psychological support, no advocate. Even though he had a mild intellectual disability, his language skills were limited. He was easily influenced and had a tendency to make things up just to please others. After hours of high-pressure interrogation and without any legal protection, Peter ended up signing a confession, but just days later, he took it back. He said he didn't understand what he had signed and felt pressured into it. Prosecutors brought forward what they called key evidence, a bite mark found on the victim's body. They claimed it matched Sullivan, but the analysis was vague and lacked any solid scientific foundation. Still, in 1987, Peter Sullivan was sentenced to life in prison, minimum term, 16 years, but he was never released. Not until nearly 4 decades later. For decades, the case of Diane Sindel seemed closed. Peter Sullivan, the so-called killer, was locked away behind bars, but one tiny piece of evidence from 1986 changed everything. It was a semen sample found on Diane's body, preserved in the evidence vault for nearly 40 years. Back then, forensic technology wasn't advanced enough to analyze it. But by 2023, with massive leaps in DNA science, the sample was finally retested, and the result? The DNA was not a match for Peter Sullivan. The man who'd spent 37 years in prison had left no biological trace at the crime scene. Even more shocking, 260 other potential suspects were also ruled out. The case was immediately referred to the CCRC, the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Peter had appealed twice before. Both times he failed, but this time, the evidence was undeniable. The CCRC passed the case to the Court of Appeal, and on May 12, 2025, the ruling came down. The conviction cannot be considered safe. We quashed the verdict in its entirety. Peter Sullivan, now 68 years old, attended the hearing via video link from HMP Wakefield, a high-security prison once home to infamous criminals like Roy Whiting and Ian Watkins. As the judgment was read aloud, Peter broke down in tears. He covered his face, speechless. Overwhelmed. After 38 years behind bars, branded a monster, Peter Sullivan was finally free. But what he lost was a lifetime. Peter Sullivan's release, after 38 years of wrongful imprisonment, didn't just shock the public. It sent shockwaves through the UK's political system. MP Kim Johnson, a member of the Labour Party, delivered a powerful statement. This is a clear and damning example of the complete failure of the British justice system. She called for a full, independent investigation and demanded urgent reforms, a complete overhaul of the CCRC, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, increased funding and staffing, and most importantly, greater transparency and stricter oversight in both investigations and prosecutions. Even the Prime Minister's office, Downing Street, was forced to respond with an official statement. We acknowledge that this was a grave miscarriage of justice. The recent ruling must be thoroughly reviewed so that both Peter Sullivan and the family of Diane Sindel receive the answers they deserve. Because in this story, there are no real winners. Peter may have walked free, but he lost nearly an entire lifetime behind bars. And Diane's family, they lost their daughter, and to this day, still don't know who really killed her. Justice has finally come for Peter Sullivan. But what about justice for Diane Sindel? Too many. Peter Sullivan's release may feel like a victory for justice, but for those closest to the case, it's a painful reminder that in this story, there are no winners. Peter's sister, Kim Smith, spoke through tears. We lost him for 39 years, and in the end, no one won this case. And Peter, the man finally declared innocent after nearly 4 decades. Behind bars, he didn't lash out, he didn't express anger. Instead, he simply said, "I'm not angry. I just hope Diane's family finds real justice." That quiet statement moved many, but for others who had lived through wrongful imprisonment, it was almost too much to believe. John Actie, who spent 2 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit in the Lynette White case, shared his thoughts. "I only did 2 years, and it still haunts me to this day." But him, Peter Sullivan, he lost 38 years. I can't even imagine that. And he's not angry, honestly. It chokes me up just thinking about it. But time isn't the only thing Peter lost. Even after being fully exonerated by the court, he now faces another battle to prove his absolute innocence in order to qualify for compensation. Yes, despite the ruling, there's still a bureaucratic hurdle to clear. And if he is granted compensation, the maximum amount he can receive is £1 million, roughly £26, for each year he was wrongfully imprisoned. 38 years of life, traded for £1 million. No ruling can erase the pain carried by both families. Peter Sullivan is now a free man, but 38 years of stolen youth. Can anyone ever make that right? And what about Diane Sindel, a young woman, a bride-to-be, a real victim? Her life was taken, and her real killer is still out there. So, has justice truly been served, or did it simply come far too late? Because if that DNA sample from 1986 hadn't been preserved, if forensic science hadn't advanced, would Peter have died behind bars, forever branded a murderer? What about you? What do you think of this case? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you stand for justice. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories like this one. Thanks for watching until the end. We'll see you in the next video.